Hello, this is Dr. Jackalyn with DTP-Leadership Group, and this is Hot Topic, Bold Talk. And I want to talk to you this evening about Trump's second term of deceit and unmasking the first 100 days of his falsehoods. Because there are plenty of articles out there telling all the lies he told or the falsehoods, and then what the impact is on the American people. So I want to begin by talking about what the Washington Post exposes about a pattern of deceit. I think this gives us a very clear picture. And one of the things I'm going to do this evening in my podcast is I'm going to give you the where the article was published, and then I'm going to give you the title of the article, and then I'm going to leave it to you to find the references at the end of this podcast, and be able to know which ones you want to look for if you want to read more extensively about what is happening. So on April 30th, 2025, there was an article that came out from the Washington Post called 100 Days of Trump 2.0. Falsehood after falsehood and again and again. And I like the author. I think Gene Kessler is very honest and very straightforward. So there's some that I'll mention, and then it doesn't mean I don't think the others are honest. I think they're powerful. I just don't want to put in too many names of authors this evening. The President's Time magazine really gave a chance for us to view 32 falsehood or misleading claims. Now, you have the opportunity to read all of them if you want, because I've given you the resource. I want to begin, though, this article and indicate to you what the lengthy interview with Time magazine was filled with. And Time says it was filled with hefty doses of BS and 32 inaccuracies in his interview. So the false claims that distort economic reality. And I'll talk about each section and what they represent. One of his claims was, we're losing $2 trillion a year on trade, and you can't do that. This is false. The goods and services deficit was almost $920 billion in 2024, and the United States did not lose any money on trade deficits. I think we can further see that he's doubled the number, and we have to face the fact that Trump is making decisions about the tariffs in our economy based on his false beliefs of what he's spewing out in public. Another one that is falsehood is, just to go back to the past, I took in hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs from China. This is false. Trump's China tariffs in his first term took in only 75 billion, not counting 28 billion in aid to farmers who lost their shirts when China stopped buying soybeans, pork, and other products because of Trump's tariffs. Another claim that he does is, I made 200 trade deals. This is also false. Officials say one deal is close to being completed, but needs approval from the country's leaders. The next section that I would mention to you in this interview and give you some examples is lies about committees, enemies, and convenient scapegoats. Here's a comment he made. Nobody mentions the fact that the unselected committee of political scum, they destroyed all evidence, they burned it, they got rid of it, they destroyed it. This is very false. While some sensitive evidence was withheld by the January 6th committee to protect witnesses from Trump and others that were so angry about it, More than 100 depositions, transcripts, and other documents were available online and open to inspection. His hatred for the committee is part of his vindictive belief system that feeds his rage about him being tied to a January 6th, which we all know he helped orchestrate. Another one that he says, I watched Nancy Pelosi get rich through her insider information. Nancy Pelosi knew how to handle him, and so he's been pissed at her for years. This comment is false. There is no evidence that the former House Speaker used inside information while trading stocks, which would be a crime. I named in a previous podcast that there could have, that because of the way he named things about the tariffs, and then all of a sudden one day he backed off of the tariffs, it could give any Republican information on when they would withdraw tariffs or to improve this, as he improved the stock market. So there, the Democrats and Republicans are demanding information on the stock trading of specific people that are in Congress on specific days, because it is questionable whether they benefited from knowing some information from him, and it is insider trading. His constant shifting of blame and disdainful comments about people is to create a diversion from what is really happening. And that's what Trump does. So you need to understand this is only a diversion. He's trying to prevent you from looking at and facing the reality of what's happening in our country that he is doing. Another favorite I want to talk about is Trump's bait and switch strategy. When times get tough, Trump resorts to a bait and switch system. An example is when Trump warns us that we have a problem and he's never warned us. He will claim that a problem is not his, even though he took credit when things were good before. The truth is, Trump faces plunging polls, staggering economic numbers, and skittish security markets, mainly because of his tariff policy. Another thing I want to mention to you is the fabrications about immigration and crime. And the reason I'm giving you this is here's a man that has these very false beliefs. He is running our country on those false beliefs. So here's a perfect example. He said in this interview, many criminals, they empty their prisons when in many countries, almost every country, but not a complete empty, but some countries, a complete empty of their prison system. As Time said, this is poppycock. Immigration experts know of no effort by other countries to empty their prisons and mental institutions. Trump obviously appears to be channeling Cuban leader Fidel Castro in his 1980 boat lift, where 125,000 Cubans were allowed to flee to the United States in 1,700 boats. But there was a backlash when it was discovered that the hundreds of refugees had been released from jails and mental health facilities. There is no evidence this happened during Biden's administration. Yet again, Trump is basing his policy on one of Trump's inventions about immigration and what has really happened in the past. Another thing he's done is misrepresent the economy and military spending. Here's what he says. Now, if you take a look, the price of groceries are down. The price of energy is down. This is false. The consumer price index for at-home food items increased 0.49% from February, while retail gas prices are basically the same since Trump took office in January. The price of oil could drop if there's a recession, and that's what we may be looking. There are a number of economists that have very clearly stated that there is a potential that we will have a recession based on his actions with tariffs. We can't ignore it. Another thing is, he said, we paid billions of dollars for the military, Japan, billions for those and others, but that I'm going to keep separated sometime. In fact, his statements don't often make a lot of sense. And he says, but that I'm going to keep us as a separate time, the paying of the military. Here are the facts, because this is false. South Korea and Japan pay as well. From 2016 through 2019, the Defense Department spent roughly $20.9 billion in Japan and $13.4 billion in South Korea to pay military salaries, construct facilities, and perform maintenance. There was a construction of facilities, and there was more need for maintenance itself. This is what the Government Accountability Office has concluded in 2021. So the fact is, the governments of Japan and South Korea also provided $12.6 billion and $5.8 billion, respectively, to support the U.S. presence. We're a huge country. He's saying we realize now we spent $20.9 billion in Japan and $13.4 billion in South Korea, and yet the governments of Japan paid us $12.6 billion and South Korea $5.8 billion. It's part of our security process. Another quote he's given is, we have $7 trillion of new plants, factories, and other things, investments coming in the US. If you look back at past presidents, nobody was anywhere near that. And this is in the third month. This is also false. At the beginning of April, the White House produced a list of only 1.5 trillion, 2/3 of which came from Apple and an AI project called Stargate that was already under development before Trump ever took office. This is another one of his habits. He always has to borrow from somewhere else and claim that he did it when he did not do it at all. Since then, we've counted a series of announced investments, and they list some of the companies that total perhaps another 1 trillion. So he is way off base with his comment. Now, my recommendation to you is to read the article that I've just given you by Kessler, if you really want to know all the 32 falsehoods. I truly feel disturbed that we have a president of the United States that is incapable of telling the truth and fills the media with falsehoods every day. If you want to read more detail about his interview of the 100 days and its impact, there's another excellent article that's titled Miriam Dowd and Carlos Lazanda on 100 Days of Trump's Fake Reality. And this was on April 30th, 2025 in the New York Times. I think this article is excellent because it gives a discussion between these individuals about what Trump is doing. It's very lengthy, but it has a great discussion for them about the things that he's doing and the falsehood he's creating. As we all know, many of us sat stunned for a brief period when he came into office, and then we started marching and speaking out, and we were getting louder and louder about Trump's incompetency. Trump continues to lie to himself, and you have seen that in the comments he makes, he's lying to us. Now, here's the reality where the American people are, and I'm going to show you based on the polls. They are not happy, and the polls tell us what the people believe. So Americans are criticizing Trump's policies in the polls. And David Graham, who's one of my favorite writers with the Atlantic, on Tuesday, April 29th of this year, had an article entitled Capitalizing on Eras. Here is the truth. That wasn't true then, and it's even less true now that he's capitalizing on eras. As Trump hits his 100th day in office today, pollsters have been releasing new surveys, and the results are ugly. NBC News finds that 55% of the Americans disapprove of the president's handling of the job, but that's rosy compared with 59% in a CNN poll. An ABC News Washington Post poll finds that just 39% of Americans approve of Trump's performance, the lowest ever recorded, going back to 1945 and smashing through the previous record of 42% set by one Donald Trump in 2017. So he has the lowest polls of any president since 1945. More than half of the Americans say that Trump is a dangerous dictator whose powers should be limited because he destroys American democracy. And this is according to the Public Religious Research Institute. Asked by NPR to give Trump a letter grade for his first 100 days, a full 45% of Americans gave the president an F, including 49% of those people were independent voters. 60% believe that the country is on the wrong track per NBC. Immigration is historically one of the things that Trump has had as a strong issue. The ABC Post polls find more voters disapprove of this handling of immigration. The economy now, fewer than 4 in 10 people in America approve of Trump's handling of the economy. Consumer confidence is at its worst level since the early weeks of the coronavirus pandemic. An unpopular president is a less powerful president. Enacting an authoritarian approach is harder without public support and other institutions. The Republican Party, universities, and law firms are less likely to bend their knees if they see weakness. And we're seeing that because there's some things I'll mention about the Congress where the Republicans that are starting to say they are not interested in passing this budget. If you want a chart of past presidents and more detail, one of the best articles I can recommend to you is in the Washington Post. It's entitled Trump's Appeal Sinks as Americans Criticize His Major Policy. This poll gives you a wonderful chart system that shows you exactly what's going on and how he's compared to other presidents. Trump's 100 days approval rating, as they have said in this article, in both terms are lower than any president since polls began. This chart is the best part of this article since their findings are similar to the other statements I've given you from previous podcasts I've done and also the things I'm saying in this particular podcast. I think we have to face the reality that as Americans, we need to face some things about the incompetency and the ridiculous decision-making process he's doing with these false beliefs. Beyond the falsehoods and political spin, there are critical truths we as Americans must confront. The economy is shrinking and the tariffs are sapping our economic growth. It is amazing to me that people could not see the excellent economy we had under Biden that is now being progressively destroyed by Trump's inability to realize that his policies and his tariff war, his policies and his tariff war are not working. So facing the cost of believing in falsehoods is something we all have to face. There are many stories coming out of small businesses having to face the fact that the high tariffs could bankrupt them or put them out of business in 3 to 6 months. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, has a podcast where he interviewed 4 business owners that were dismayed by the tariff impact on their companies. Inc. magazine, in their newsletter on April 29, 2025, with an article, "This small business was hit with a surprise 181% tariff. Call it the Trump tax." The author describes what happens to Barra Trash, which is an interesting company that has global trading because of what it sells. And here's the part of the story that I think is important to hear from the founder of this organization. With the purchase order signed, the company secured a bank loan to finance the inventory from its Chinese factory, knowing that once the retailers paid for their purchase, their company would make just under a 50% gross profit. But then yesterday, the head of the company checked his bank account to find that he'd been charged an extra $5,645, an unexpected 181% tariff. This sum is nearly doubled what they were supposed to pay to spend for marketing of its dance warm-ups, and close to the $6,000 total that the company agreed to charge the buyers. Before Barra Trash has additional shipping costs, on top of that, the owner says we're losing overnight $3,000 or $4,000, depending on how you look at it. This company has received no notice or communication about the tariff charge. Upon noticing the number, he said he called the Federal Express representative and asked what was going on. And it was explained to him that the tariff was being imposed on the order and why it was even higher than the much quoted 145% Chinese tariff that the Trump administration mandated in early April. An additional clothing duty was added that is the baseline for the tariff. So that is the reason we have another 181 tariff that this poor company is trying to deal with. Because of the frequent charges and tariffs over the past month, the owner says everything came in during the exact worst week for it to come in. So he's fluctuating the tariffs, and so there's no way to plan around it. If the products had been statewide just a week earlier, the young brand could have potentially avoided the charges. And this is only one of 100 of small businesses. I'm reading about them continually every day that were thriving, and now Trump's investment in his tariff war is destroying their capacity to be their outstanding business that they were before he got into office. Facing the cost of believing falsehoods is something that we all have to talk with our friends that are invested in these falsehoods. It is difficult to admit that someone we once trusted is consistently misleading us, but America must wake up to the pattern of deception. And I'm not talking about myself, since I did not vote for it. But those of you that truly trusted him have now been truly misled. His decisions are rooted in fiction or are now shaping our real policy with serious consequences. Understanding the long-term impact is very important for all of us. Let me give you another view of what is happening in Washington with the 100 days of Trump's presidency. I have great respect for the Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, since she represents our district. And her comments on Friday, May 2nd, I think really called to test what is going on. And I give you her email if you would like to start subscribing, because she gives great information weekly. She says, this milestone week, many people have written useful summaries of the first 100 days of Trump's administration with more detailed analysis. But they make clear that during this short period, President Trump has failed to focus on improving the lives of Americans or lowering prices, or instead, he is crashing our economy, dismantling essential federal programs and agencies, withholding funding Congress has appropriately appropriated, and ignoring the rule of law. He's defying the courts, and he's jeopardizing our national security and destabilizing our economy. She goes on to say, this week, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, a nonpartisan federal agency, released a report that showed the U.S. GDP sank by 0.3% in the first quarter of this year, a real contrast from a strong 3.4% growth in the fourth quarter of last year when Biden was president. The report also noted that the prices rose for the second straight quarter, jumping from 2.4% to 3.6%, and a core inflation climbed to 3.5%. In just 100 days, the stock market has lost nearly $10 trillion in values. Hear that again. In just 100 days, the stock market has lost nearly $10 trillion in values. I know many of my friends that have lost on the various things that they've invested in the stock market. So I encourage you to read this important coverage, because the impact of these actions that have happened in our district and across the country and around the world. So Lizzie Fletcher is saying, read what's going on, understand. And she makes it easy because she gives a report every week. She goes on to say, much of the focus for the last 100 days has been on what is happening in the White House, and with good reason. Republicans in Congress have largely rubber-stamped the unprecedented actions from the White House. But having voted on a budget resolution directing committees in Congress to make major spending cuts and tax cuts, committees through the House of Representatives are in the process of preparing their PAT, House Republican Reconciliation Package. Now, I know that there are problems that are occurring now after what all he's done, because people are seeing his weaknesses and are unwilling to support it. She described the cut of $880 billion from Medicaid. I do not think Trump realizes that many of his supporters that are white depend on Medicaid to take care of their families. Other cuts are Republicans have voted to cut the Neighborhood Access and Equity Program, a $3.3 billion federal program meant to reconnect underserved inner city neighborhoods. She goes on to say, this is just the first of many disastrous cuts for our community in this budget reconciliation process in Congress. I will keep you posted as this process progresses. I've heard from many of my friends that their Republican representatives in Congress are refusing to even contact them or hear what their concerns are. Republicans have been told not to have town hall meetings, and the issue is Trump does not want the publicity of what is happening at these meetings. So no wonder people are marching and stating exactly what they are unhappy about. There have been 2 marches just recently. Truth requires action. And what do we need to do? In a CNN 5 things that happened in their newsletter on Friday, May 2nd, gives a good description of the May demonstrations. Thousands of protesters rallied across the United States on Thursday in response to Trump's administration actions on immigration, the war in Gaza, federal workers, and unions. The demonstrators, who were organized under the banner of the grassroots 501 movement, filled the streets of major cities and small towns, holding signs and calling for change. Trump has poor and working class people forgetting who our enemies are, they say in this article. Our enemies are not international students that organize on their campuses. Our enemies are not documented workers that contribute to their communities, which pay taxes and can't get service. And let me correct that and say, it's our enemies are not documented workers. Forgive me for that. But not documented workers that contribute to our communities. And I'm well aware of that. I think it's horrifying that people have been contributing for 15 or 20 or umpteen zillion years in our country that are immigrants that have come in. They are here, and we are treating them like enemies. Another thing they say from this march is our enemies are not workers that work for corporations, an organization said to a large crowd in New York in Union Square. No, this racist, sexist, anti-worker, homophobic, xenophobic, transphobic system is our enemy. And more demonstrations are scheduled to take place. And they did on Saturday. Now it's time for us to take responsibility as citizens. Our democracy depends upon informed citizens. So we need to start sharing this information. And that's the reason I do these podcasts. When we fail to hold leaders accountable, we invite chaos. And that's what's happening now. The truth is available if we choose to see it. And it is time to listen and speak out and vote accordingly. Now, the Times newsletter on April 19 had an interesting article because they had some resources that told them that there was fighting going on between Bezos, White House, and Amazon. And it was because Amazon was supposed to be showing tariff cost. Yet out of the White House, it was said that this was a hostile act. Now, Bezos has paid $1 million for Trump's inauguration. He's contributed to it. So later, Amazon said that they had no intention in announcing tariff costs. I feel sad since I thought maybe one of the billionaires would speak out. And here's the brief summary of the story So you know it. Whether it's true or not, and I think that Time would not put out something without having proven resources. The White House lashed out at Amazon on Tuesday, reporting planning to display how much of a product's cost come from Trump's tariffs. Doing so would emphasize to the consumers that the U.S. tariffs are not paid by overseas companies, but by American companies importing the goods, and then largely passed on to the customer. This is a hostile political act, which the White House press secretary said. Now, I believe that consumers need to know and be educated about the cost of Trump's tariffs. That's the reason I think these stories coming out are extremely important for us to read and learn all what's going on. A democracy is based on educating people through free speech to know what is going on in our country. And we can say even, and we can see it continually, the effort to suppress information is very much a part of the Trump administration. As citizens of a democracy, we cannot make good decisions about our country if we only are told lies and falsehoods. It is too bad, I think, that Jeff Bezos would not provide the tariff cost to all of us. The more stories of companies that are having the high tariff costs, I think that as they provide these company stories, that this will encourage us to fully understand what's going on and start speaking more and standing more. Because once marches occur and people are telling the truth, then the individuals who voted for Trump cannot deny what is going on. I want to conclude in this way. The first 100 days of Trump's second term have already exposed a troubling trend. A presidency built not on facts or accountability, but on distortion, distraction, and deception. When a leader repeatedly chooses to mislead the public about the economy, immigration, military alliances, or democratic process, we must ask ourselves, how much longer can we afford to ignore the truth? As Americans, our democracy relies on an informed and courageous public, one that refuses to be lulled by sound bites and false vibrato. So I'm saying to you, it's time for us to start listening and become very well informed and know that Trump is something we cannot be lulled by his sound bites and his false bravado that he does to try to cover up what's happening. Now is the time to face the facts, confront the lies, and demand leadership be rooted in truth, not speculation. Our future depends on it. Thank you.